The night air in Fayetteville carried that damp chill that sinks into your bones, the kind that makes even familiar streets feel hostile. I had been on leave for 2 weeks catching up on paperwork, running a few miles each morning, and trying not to think about the barracks waiting for me back at Fort Bragg. Tomorrow, I was supposed to drive through those gates again. I should have felt focused, ready. Instead, I was standing in the driveway of my father Richard's house, staring at the shadows stretching long under the single streetlight. My stepbrother Jason was waiting there. He leaned against the hood of his old pickup, arms folded across his chest like he had been planning this moment. He was 2 years older, broad-shouldered, with the permanent sneer of someone who believed life owed him. I had been dreading the conversation since my stepmother Linda first dropped hints about co-signing a loan. Tonight, I realized it was not going to be a conversation at all. Jason stepped forward, the gravel crunching beneath his boots.
"You think you can walk back into your soldier life and leave us drowning here?"
His words slurred with beer, but his eyes were sharp. Linda's voice floated out from the porch, cold and steady. "Claire, just sign the papers. You live under this roof when you come home. You owe us." I tightened my grip on my duffel bag. I had already said no a dozen times. Tonight would be the last. I said it slowly, carefully, like defusing a bomb. "I am not signing anything. Not for you. Not for her. Not for anyone." Jason's jaw twitched and he laughed without humor. "You think that uniform makes you better. You think the army will save you. You are still the weak little girl hiding in the closet." I tried to walk past him the front door, and the smell of Linda's stale cigarettes drawing closer with each step. Then it happened. Jason's fist came out of nowhere. The impact was like being hit by a steel beam. My skull cracked against the concrete driveway, stars exploding behind my eyes. I tasted blood, metallic and hot. My lungs seized. Somewhere far away, Linda gasped. Somewhere even further, I heard myself groan, then nothing. When I opened my eyes again, fluorescent lights burned above me. I could hear voices, calm but urgent, echoing off white tile. A nurse shouted for a crash cart. A doctor pressed cold metal against my chest. No pulse. "She has been pronounced clinically dead." The words cut through me, though I was floating outside my own body. Clinically dead. Declared gone. My chest felt heavy, my breath stolen my life. Paused like a tape left spinning. In that strange silence, I saw flashes. My first day of ROTC in high school, Jason ripping my pressed shirt in the hallway while Linda pretended not to notice. The face of my grandmother Margaret telling me that strength sometimes looks like survival. The sound of boots on gravel at Fort Bragg, the cadence of a drill sergeant demanding one more push-up, one more lap, one more ounce of fight. All of it collided in my head like sparks against stone. A shock tore through my chest, my body jolting against the hospital bed. Someone said again. Another wave. Pain surged, burning, pulling me back. I gasped like breaking the surface of deep water. The nurse cried out. "We have a rhythm. She is back." The doctor's voice steadied. "Stabilize her. She is fragile but alive." Alive! For the first time since the driveway, I understood I had not been buried yet. I was still here, and I would not waste that. As the room blurred in and out, I caught the muffled sound of Linda's voice in the hallway. Jason's deeper tone snapped like a whip. "We cannot let this get out. We have to cover this up. If she talks, everything falls." My blood ran colder than the IV dripping into my arm. They thought I was gone. They thought my silence was permanent. But I had returned, not just breathing, but listening. The night before I was supposed to return to the barracks became something else entirely. It became the night my family crossed a line they could never erase. The night my stepbrother tried to erase me. The night my stepmother chose cover-up over compassion. And the night my father's house stopped being home forever. I would not be silent anymore. If your own family betrayed you this way, if the people who should have defended you stood watching while you were left broken on the pavement, what would you do? Would you walk away? Would you fight back? Drop a comment below and tell me, because that night was not the end. That night was only the beginning. I used to think that the walls of my childhood home in Fayetteville carried whispers, not voices. Every time the air conditioner hummed or the wood settled at night, I thought I heard my mother's voice, soft and careful, the way she used to sing when she tucked me in. But that was before she was gone, before I was old enough to understand that not every family chooses to love their children equally. I was 8 when my mother passed away, old enough to remember the smell of her perfume lingering on the couch, too young to know that her absence would become a weapon in the hands of the people who remained. My father Richard remarried quickly. Linda arrived like a storm. She wore bright lipstick smoked menthols that left their smell everywhere and moved into our house with her son Jason. I remember her first night in the kitchen cooking pasta that was oversalted and burned, and the way she looked at me when I refused to finish it. That look stayed for years. From the beginning, Jason was the chosen one. Linda made sure of it. Every meal, every holiday, every new purchase revolved around him. If Jason wanted a new baseball bat, he got it. If I asked for a notebook for school, Linda would mutter about how I was too demanding, how I should learn to be grateful. Richard never challenged her. He sat in his recliner, a can of beer in hand, eyes glued to the television, while I sat at the table with homework I could barely finish under the weight of their indifference. Jason grew into a bully the way a seed grows into a weed. At 12, he would shove me into walls when nobody was looking. At 14, he snapped at the strap of my backpack until it broke, and Linda scolded me for being careless. At 16, when I joined the ROTC program at high school, proud in my pressed uniform, Jason grabbed my collar in the hallway and ripped the seam. I still remember the sound of fabric tearing, the laughter that followed, and Linda telling me to stop being dramatic when I came home with tears in my eyes. The house was filled with small cruelties that piled up like bricks, each one building a prison around me. The smell of Linda's cigarettes clung to my pillowcases. The sound of beer cans cracking open marked the end of Richard's evenings. Jason's sneakers squeaked against the kitchen floor as he strutted past me, his smirk daring me to speak. And through it all, I learned silence. I learned that in this house, my words were ammunition for their contempt. Still, there were rare moments of kindness. My grandmother Margaret, my mother's mother, lived only a few blocks away. She would pick me up on weekends, feed me warm biscuits with honey, and tell me I was stronger than they wanted me to believe. She reminded me that my mother had loved me beyond measure, that I carried her spirit. For a while, Margaret's house felt like sanctuary, but then she grew frail, her voice thinner each year until she was gone too. When she passed, Linda didn't even let me keep her scarf. She called it clutter and tossed it in a donation bin. By the time I turned 18, the house no longer felt like a home. It was a battlefield. Jason towered over me, Richard avoided me, and Linda sharpened her words into knives. Every dinner was another round of accusations. Why couldn't I be more like Jason? Why couldn't I respect Linda more? Why did I always embarrass Richard? Their voices clashed against the television, against the buzzing of the old ceiling fan, until I thought my head would split. I buried myself in ROTC in long runs through Fayetteville streets, in late-night study sessions, where I told myself I would leave. The Army would be my escape. Fort Bragg would be my new beginning. But no matter how far I ran, the shadows of that house followed me, whispering that blood could betray and betrayal could destroy. By the time high school ended, I had perfected the art of disappearing inside my own house. I moved like a shadow, careful not to make noise in the hallway, careful not to touch the fridge when Linda was in the kitchen, careful not to speak if Jason was within earshot. Silence was the only way to avoid becoming a target. But even silence had its cost. It meant I swallowed every insult, every jab, every reminder that in their eyes I was less than. I remember the night before graduation sitting at the kitchen table trying to iron my ROTC sash with the small iron I borrowed from a neighbor. Jason came in, reeking of beer, knocked the iron to the floor, and stepped on the sash just to watch me flinch. Linda's voice came from the living room, sharp and dismissive. "Claire, stop making a scene." My father never looked up from his recliner. That moment hardened something inside me. I told myself then that as soon as I could leave, I would never come back. Still, even as I pushed through the Army's entrance paperwork and dreamt of barracks far from Fayetteville, I carried the sting of what I had endured. On the night of my 18th birthday, Jason shoved me into the porch railing hard enough to bruise my ribs. He called it a joke. Linda laughed and told me to toughen up. My father muttered something about kids being kids. I stood there, the bruise blooming under my shirt, knowing deep down that none of them would ever see me as more than a punching bag or a burden. I kept that memory like a scar under my uniform when I finally stepped onto the training field at Fort Bragg. What made the betrayal worse was not the violence itself, but the quiet normalization of it. In Fayetteville, people said our family looked stable from the outside. Linda kept the lawn tidy. Richard wore his Army veteran cap to the grocery store. Jason smiled for photographs at barbecues. Behind closed doors, the truth was different. The truth was the sharp smell of beer, the echo of Jason's laughter after knocking my books to the ground, the way Linda's hand tightened on my father's arm whenever he considered standing up for me. The truth was that my voice never mattered inside those walls. Looking back, I realize I trained myself to measure every word and every step because I never knew what would ignite Jason's temper. He was unpredictable, cruel for the sake of cruelty, yet Linda encouraged it. Sometimes she would sit back and watch. Sometimes she joined in with comments that cut deeper than his fists. Richard retreated into silence, and in that silence, I learned the most painful lesson of all, that a parent's absence can hurt as much as their rejection. And yet, even in that misery, small sparks of defiance survived. I remember sneaking out for midnight runs along Bragg Boulevard, my sneakers slapping against the pavement, the streetlights painting long shadows. Each step was a promise to myself that I would not be trapped forever. I remember the day I received my acceptance letter into the Army and the way my chest swelled with pride, even as Linda scoffed that it was just a phase. Jason told me I would fail. My father said nothing, but I folded that letter, tucked it into my wallet, and carried it with me as proof that I was more than what they wanted me to believe. When I left for Fort Bragg the first time, duffel bag slung over my shoulder, Linda didn't hug me. Jason didn't shake my hand. Richard didn't wish me luck. The door closed behind me, and the air outside felt different, lighter. But freedom was not complete. No matter how far I ran in uniform, Fayetteville and that toxic house still clung to me. I knew the moment I stepped back for leave, the battles would return, and so they did. Every homecoming was a replay of control pressure and manipulation. They always wanted something, always reminded me of where I came from, always tried to make me small again. This is why standing in that hospital room years later with monitors beeping and the taste of blood still in my mouth, the words I overheard Linda whispering outside the door cut deeper than Jason's fists. We cannot let this get out. We have to cover this up. If she talks, everything falls. It was the same pattern I had lived through since childhood, the same silencing, the same cover-up, the same denial of my pain. The difference now was that I was no longer a child. I was no longer a shadow. I had been declared clinically dead, and yet I came back breathing. This time, I would not carry their silence. This time, I would make them face what they had created. When I first stepped through the gates of Fort Bragg, I carried more than a duffel bag slung over my shoulder. I carried the weight of years spent being told I was nothing. I carried bruises that had faded from my skin, but not from my memory. I carried the silence of a house where my voice never mattered, yet for the first time as the gravel crunched under my boots and I fell into formation with other recruits, I felt the faint tremor of possibility. Here, no one knew about Linda's contempt, Jason's fists, or my father's silence. Here I was just Private Anderson, another soldier in a sea of uniforms. The first weeks were brutal. Early mornings before the sun had even thought of rising, the sound of a whistle slicing through the dark, the sharp bark of orders that allowed no hesitation. My body ached in ways I had never imagined. My lungs burned as I ran mile after mile, and blisters turned my feet raw. But something inside me woke up during those runs. Each time I pushed past exhaustion, I felt pieces of that girl from Fayetteville fall away. Every push-up was a rejection of Linda's insults. Every lap was defiance against Jason's smirk. Every drop of sweat was proof that I could survive without the approval of people who had never wanted me strong. There was a moment during weapons training that I will never forget. Captain Miller, a stern officer with sharp eyes but a fair manner, stood behind me as I steadied my rifle on the range. My hands trembled. His voice cut through the tension.
Breathe, Anderson. Control it. Don't let it control you.
I drew in a deep breath, squeezed, and hit the target clean. Miller nodded once. That's more like it. It was a small acknowledgement, barely a sentence, but to me, it was the first time an authority figure had seen me for my ability instead of my failure. That nod carried me through weeks of training. By the end of basic, I had bruises in new places, calluses on my palms, and a pride I had never known. Graduation day at Fort Bragg was nothing like my high school one. No family cheering, no Jason mocking me from the sidelines. Just rows of uniforms, medals gleaming under the Carolina sun and the steady clap of commanders who had seen us endure. When I stood at attention and received my certificate, I felt something unshakable bloom inside me. For once, I wasn't surviving for someone else's approval. I was building myself from the ground up. The Army gave me more than discipline. It gave me a community. In the barracks, surrounded by other young soldiers, I learned the value of camaraderie. We came from different states, different families, different backgrounds, but in the mud of the obstacle course and the sweat of long marches, we were bound by the same mission. Sergeant Davis, older than me by a few years, became a mentor. He had an easy laugh but sharp instincts, the kind of soldier who could pull you through a wall of fire with sheer determination. He once told me over late-night rations, "The Army will test you, Anderson, but it will also free you if you let it." I didn't realize how true his words were until later. Still, the past had a way of seeping through cracks. On nights when the barracks quieted and the hum of distant traffic filled the silence, memories of Fayetteville returned. Jason's sneer, Linda's cigarette smoke, Richard's vacant eyes. I would close my eyes and hear them, but then the echo of cadence chants from earlier that day would drown it out. One more mile. One more push. One more chance. That rhythm became my shield. During my first official assignment, we ran joint exercises in the pine forests outside Fort Bragg. The heat was heavy, the ground soft with needles, and the air thick with humidity. I remember lying in the dirt, sweat dripping down my temple, watching the sun flare through branches as I waited for the signal to move. For a moment, I thought about how different it felt to be invisible here. Not ignored like in my father's house, but hidden as part of a unit valued for what I contributed. When the flare went up and we charged forward, my voice joined the others in a shout that tore through the woods. For the first time, my voice wasn't silenced. It mattered. Letters from home were rare. When they came, they were thin and cold. Linda's handwriting on cheap paper reminding me about bills, about Jason's struggles, about how much my father worried I might not make it. There was never a word of pride, never a word of encouragement. I stopped opening them after a while. Instead, I carried Margaret's memory with me. I could almost hear her voice when the drills grew unbearable. "You're stronger than they want you to believe." Each step through training, each mission completed, each commendation earned, proved her right. 2 years into service, I received my first commendation for exceptional performance during a field exercise. Captain Miller handed me the slip in front of the unit. "Good work, Anderson. You've got grit." The words settled into me like armor. Later that night, as the barracks buzzed with laughter and the glow of victory, I thought about how far I had come from the girl ironing her ROTC sash under Jason's mocking gaze. That girl had been fragile cornered. The woman I was becoming was still scarred, but she was no longer broken. And yet, even with the strength I gained, every return to Fayetteville reminded me that family shadows linger. On leave, I would drive past Cape Fear Valley, past the grocery store where Linda once sneered at my uniform, past the driveway where Jason always seemed to stand waiting. They reminded me that no matter how far I ran, my past would not release me easily. Each visit home chipped at the foundation I built at Fort Bragg. Every insult, every demand, every reminder that I was still their target gnawed at me. The Army had given me discipline, confidence, and community, but it had not erased the truth. My family was toxic, and their control was relentless. What I didn't realize yet was that the strongest battles are not fought on training fields or rifle ranges. They are fought in the driveways and living rooms where blood becomes a weapon, where betrayal wears the mask of family. And soon, on the night before I was set to return to my barracks once again, I would discover that all the strength I had built would be tested in ways I never imagined. The night before I was supposed to report back to Fort Bragg began with a tension I could feel in my skin. Fayetteville was quiet, the humid summer air pressing down, and the cicadas screeched from the trees as if warning me. I had returned home for a short leave, just enough time to wash my uniforms, restock my gear, and check in with my father. I knew every trip back to that house carried danger, but I told myself I could keep it brief. I told myself I was stronger now that nothing Jason or Linda did could shake me. I was wrong. Linda was waiting at the kitchen table when I walked in that evening, a neat stack of papers in front of her. She lit a cigarette and exhaled smoke that curled toward the ceiling fan. "Sit down, Claire," she said, her voice deceptively calm. Jason leaned against the wall, arms crossed, smirk plastered across his face. Richard sat in his recliner as always, beer can balanced on the armrest, his eyes already clouded with indifference. I stayed standing. "What is this?" Linda slid the papers toward me. "A loan application, $50,000. Jason needs a co-signer and you're going to help your family." The word family landed like a slap. I shook my head. "No, I'm not signing anything." Jason chuckled, pushing off the wall. "You think you're too good for us now. You think that uniform makes you better." I kept my voice steady, though my pulse was hammering. "I've worked too hard to throw it all away on one of your scams." Linda's face hardened. "You ungrateful little girl. After everything we've done for you." My laugh was bitter sharp. "Everything you've done. Like turning your back every time Jason put his hands on me. Like teaching me silence instead of love." Jason's smirk disappeared. He took a step forward, his shadow stretching across the table. "You better watch your mouth." I lifted my chin. "I'm not afraid of you anymore." That was the moment the thin thread holding the evening together snapped. Jason lunged faster than I expected, his fist catching the side of my face. Pain exploded my body, stumbling backward. I hit the edge of the counter, breath knocked out, but before I could recover, his hand was on my shoulder, shoving me hard. The room spun. I caught sight of Richard lowering his eyes, Linda frozen but saying nothing. Then came the blow that ended everything. Jason's fist connected squarely with my jaw, and I felt the sickening crack as my head struck the driveway outside. For a moment, there was no sound, no air, no light. Then came the taste of blood, sharp and metallic. My chest convulsed, searching for air that refused to come. My eyes fluttered, catching glimpses. Jason's face, hovering above me, breath heavy with alcohol. Linda's silhouette at the door, cigarette still glowing. Richard slumped deeper in his chair, deliberately looking away. My body twitched once, twice, then stilled. The world narrowed to a pinpoint and slipped into black. When I surfaced, it was to bright hospital lights and urgent voices. I was no longer on the driveway, but in a sterile room filled with the beeping of monitors. A doctor leaned over me, his face tight with concentration. "No pulse," he said flatly. "She's been pronounced clinically dead." The words should have ended me, but instead they echoed strange and distant as if meant for someone else. My chest felt crushed, my limbs like lead, and yet somewhere deep inside a spark still burned. The next jolt came like fire racing through my chest. My body arched against the hospital bed, arms flailing as electricity tore me back from the silence. A nurse shouted for another charge, her voice sharp and determined. Again. The shock hit, and suddenly, my lungs dragged in air. Ragged and desperate, like I had broken through the surface of deep water. I coughed, choking my body trembling as life forced itself back into me. Someone leaned over me, pressing 2 fingers to my neck. "We've got a pulse. Stabilize her." The doctor's voice was calmer now, clipped and professional. She was fragile but alive. Alive. The word echoed through my head. They had declared me gone, my body written off as another statistic of violence that would be explained away. Yet here I was, tethered to tubes and wires, my heart stumbling but beating. My chest burned, my jaw ached, and my head throbbed with every pulse, but none of it compared to the storm in my mind. I was not supposed to be here, not according to Jason, not according to Linda. Not according to anyone who had hoped my silence would last forever. I closed my eyes, not to rest, but to listen. The muffled sounds of the ICU bled into the hallway. I caught Linda's voice, sharp and hissing like a whisper that carried poison. She cannot talk. If she talks, everything falls apart. Jason's reply came harsh, angry. We finish this. We cannot let her ruin us. My chest tightened as the words sank in. They had not come to check on me, not to worry or to grieve. They had come to ensure that my silence stayed permanent. The heart monitor beside me beeped steadily, almost mocking in its rhythm. Every sound reminded me that my survival was now their greatest threat. I wanted to scream, to pull out the wires and stand up and face them, but my body betrayed me. I was too weak to move, too fragile to do more than breathe and listen. And so I listened. I heard Linda pacing her heels clicking against the linoleum. I heard Jason curse under his breath, the sound of his fist striking the wall in frustration. I even heard my father's voice, low and weary. We cannot let this destroy us. His words were not for me. They were for them, for the family that had chosen deception over truth. Hot tears pricked my eyes, not from pain, but from clarity. I had always known my place in that house. I had always known that silence was survival. But now I understood something new. Their fear was my power. The very fact that they whispered, that they schemed, that they threatened, meant that I held something they could not afford to face. I held the truth. A nurse entered quietly, adjusting the IV, unaware of the storm raging just beyond the curtain. I forced myself to remain calm, to keep my breathing even, to pretend I had heard nothing. Let them believe I was broken, unconscious, defeated. Let them think I would return to silence. Inside, I was already making a different choice. The night of violence was not just about Jason's fists or Linda's demands. It was the culmination of years of control of a childhood steeped in cruelty of a father who had looked away. They thought they had ended me. They thought my life would close on a hospital monitor and a line of ink on a death certificate. But instead, that night gave me something they never expected. It gave me a reason to rise, not just as a soldier, but as a witness, not just for myself, but for every time they had buried my voice. As the machines hummed and the antiseptic scent filled my lungs, I made a silent vow. This was not the end. This was the beginning of my fight. When the steady beep of the monitor replaced the chaos of the resuscitation, I began to notice the little things again. The antiseptic sting in the air, the faint hiss of oxygen from the tube at my nose, the tick of shoes in the corridor beyond the curtain. My body felt like lead, but my mind refused to rest. Jason's fists had tried to end me, Linda's whispers had tried to bury me, and my father's silence had tried to erase me. Yet I was here, clinging to breath, and that meant I still had choices. 2 days later, I was stable enough to be moved to a quieter ward. Nurses checked in, adjusted the IV, and encouraged me to rest. Rest was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jason's sneer in the driveway, heard Linda's whisper through the hallway wall, felt my father's absence heavier than the bandages across my ribs. I replayed every word I had overheard. If she talks, everything falls. What exactly would fall? What secret did they think my survival threatened? The question gnawed at me until it burned hotter than the pain in my jaw. When Sergeant Davis came to visit dressed in fatigues, his voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed concern. Word spreads, Claire. He leaned close. MPs are asking questions. You need to be careful. I tried to nod, though the movement sent pain shooting up my skull. They want me silent. Davis glanced toward the door. Then don't give them reason to know you're not. Collect what you can. Quietly. He left me with that, in the faint scent of dust and leather from the field, a reminder of the life waiting back at Fort Bragg if I survived this trial. Later that night, when the ward was hushed and the hum of fluorescent lights was the only sound, I asked a nurse to bring me my belongings. She placed a plastic bag on the side table, my wallet, my keys, and the dash cam from my Jeep inside. I stared at it for a long time. The outer casing was cracked, but the card slot was still intact. My hands trembled as I slid the memory card free. I had nothing but time, and time was dangerous if wasted. The hospital's patient lounge had an old desktop computer for visitors. I waited until the hallway cleared, pushed my IV stand along with me, and lowered myself into the chair with more effort than I wanted to admit. The screen blinked to life as I inserted the card. At first, it showed what I expected. Grainy footage of the driveway. Jason's figure blurred but unmistakable surging toward me. My own body collapsing out of frame. The sight made me flinch, bile rising in my throat, but I forced myself to keep watching. The angle shifted, catching Linda stepping onto the porch, cigarette glowing. Her face turned away from me and toward Jason. She didn't run to help. She simply stood there. Evidence. Proof that this wasn't just violence. It was betrayal. Then something unexpected. Earlier clips stored in a hidden folder. Footage from weeks before the dashcam catching snippets of Jason and Linda in the driveway when they thought no one was watching. Their voices faint but clear enough. Linda: "If we push this through, we clear the debt. The policy is airtight. Jason: "She won't suspect. She'll sign. And if she doesn't..." He laughed, a cruel, hollow sound. My heart clenched. Insurance. Fraud. My name tangled in papers I had never seen, signatures I had never given. Scrolling through clip after clip, the scope of their scheme unfolded. Jason meeting with a stranger by the garage, handing over envelopes. Linda whispering about forged documents. And then the detail that hollowed me out more than any punch ever could: Richard's voice. My father's voice, low but undeniable, muttering about how Claire will never see it coming. He had been part of it. The man who should have stood as my protector had folded himself into their conspiracy. I sat back, my hands shaking on the mouse. The footage was damning, but more than that, it was shattering. For years, I had tried to believe Richard was simply weak, too beaten down to stand up for me. Now I saw him for what he was: not absent, but complicit. He hadn't just ignored the cruelty. He had joined it. I copied every file onto a blank USB from the drawer, my movements clumsy but urgent. The computer's fan whirred as though aware of the weight of what it carried. When the progress bar reached 100%, I slipped the USB into my hospital gown pocket. My heart pounded as if Jason or Linda might burst through the door at any second. I returned the card to the dashcam, careful not to disturb its damaged casing. Let them think nothing had been touched. Back in my bed, I clutched the USB against my skin, the faint hum of machines around me, a reminder of how close I had come to losing everything. But now I held something they didn't expect. Their fear had told me the truth. This wasn't just about control. It was about money fraud and a conspiracy that stretched further than I had imagined. And now, I had proof. The USB pressed against my side felt heavier than any metal I had ever worn. I could not sleep that night. The beeping of the monitor beside me marked the seconds like a clock ticking down to something I could not yet name. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Richard's voice from the recording, low and complicit, whispering about a policy I had never seen, a signature I had never given. It was worse than Jason's fists or Linda's cold eyes. Betrayal from my own father cut deeper than bone. At dawn, a nurse brought me water and checked my vitals. I forced a calm smile, masking the storm inside me. When she left, I reached for my phone. My hands trembled as I dialed Sergeant Davis. His voice on the other end was steady.
"You sound alive, Anderson. That's good."
I swallowed hard.
"I have proof."
His pause was short but heavy.
"Then keep it safe. Don't say a word to them. Not yet."
His advice was not just caution, it was strategy. That afternoon, Linda appeared at the hospital. Her makeup was immaculate, her perfume choking in the small room. She sat beside my bed, her face a mask of concern. "Claire, you've been through so much." She reached for my hand. I let her touch it, though every instinct screamed to pull away. "We just want what's best for you. Jason was out of line, but we can handle this as a family." Her words slithered, polished lies that might have fooled someone else. I stayed silent, nodding weakly, letting her believe her performance had worked. When she slid another document from her purse, asking me to sign a medical authorization so she could help with my bills, I forced my voice to tremble. "Maybe later. I'm too tired now." She pressed, but did not push too hard. She believed I was broken. That was good. Broken soldiers did not plan counterattacks. Broken daughters did not hide USBs under their pillows. After she left, I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting them like I used to count seconds while holding a plank in basic training. Silence had protected me once, but now silence could expose them. The difference was choice. This time, silence would be my weapon, not theirs. 2 days later, Jason came. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, a wolfish grin on his face.
"You don't look so tough now, soldier."
His words dripped contempt. I studied him, forcing my eyes to dull my lips to tighten into a line. If he saw weakness, he would underestimate me. That was the point. He leaned closer, lowering his voice.
"If you say anything, you'll regret it. Remember that."
His breath stank of beer, his grin stretched cruelly, but his eyes flickered with something else. Fear. He was terrified I might speak. That fear confirmed what I already knew. The footage was devastating. That night, I took the USB out again, clutching it like a lifeline. I thought about Margaret, my grandmother, telling me strength sometimes looked like survival. Survival was not enough anymore. I needed to fight. Not with fists or weapons, but with truth, cold and undeniable. I wrote down names in the small notebook the nurse had given me. Sergeant Davis, trusted. Military police potential. FBI necessary. Each name was a step toward justice. Each step meant risk. If Jason or Linda discovered I had the files, they would act quickly, maybe violently. If Richard knew, he might try to cut ties, erase evidence. The danger pressed close, but so did determination. The next morning, I asked the nurse for a moment in the lounge again. This time, I copied the USB to another drive, slipping it into a different pocket. Redundancy was survival. I mailed one copy in a plain envelope to an old address I remembered, Sergeant Davis at Fort Bragg. Another I planned to hand directly to military police when I was strong enough to leave the hospital. As I slid the envelope into the outbox at the hospital desk, I felt the faintest flicker of control return. For years, they had dictated my silence. Now, I was dictating theirs. They wanted me to disappear quietly. Instead, I was building a record piece by piece that would drag them into the light. Lying back in my hospital bed, bruises still aching, I whispered to myself. They thought the driveway was the end. They thought a doctor's words would erase me. They thought fear would keep me silent. But they were wrong. I had been a soldier long before I put on a uniform, and now I had a mission. The hospital room had grown quieter as the days passed, but the silence carried a weight of dread. I knew they would come back. People like Linda and Jason never left things unfinished. They needed control the way some people needed air. And when control slipped through their fingers, they came clawing to get it back. I braced myself for the inevitable. It was late afternoon when Linda arrived again, this time without Jason. She carried a folder clutched tightly to her chest, her nails painted a glossy red that caught the fluorescent light. She smiled as she walked, in the kind of smile that pretended warmth but dripped with calculation. "Claire, you look stronger today," she said softly, setting the folder on the tray table beside my bed. I glanced at the papers but said nothing. She sat down, smoothing her skirt, and leaned closer. "I know things have been difficult. Jason lost his temper, but you know how family can be. We need to focus on the future." Her hand patted the folder. "This will help us move forward." I forced my voice to stay weak, as if I were still fragile. "What is it?" Linda slid the folder open, revealing a legal document with several highlighted lines. It was a power of attorney drafted to give her full authority over my financial matters. If I signed, she could drain my accounts, sell my car, even touch my military pay. My stomach clenched. She tapped the signature line with her manicured nail. "This is just to make things easier while you recover. You can't be expected to handle all the stress. Let us take care of you." Her words were honey, but her eyes were steel. I picked up the pen she had placed on the tray. My hand trembled, not just from the act of pretending weakness, but from the cold rage boiling under my skin. I asked softly, almost a whisper, "Why me? Why not Jason?" Linda's smile tightened. "Jason doesn't have the stability that you do. You're in uniform. You have benefits. This is practical." I lowered my eyes, letting her believe I was considering. In reality, my phone was already recording the device hidden under the blanket at my side. Every word she spoke was being captured, preserved. Proof. Evidence. Before I could answer, Jason barged into the room. He reeked of alcohol, his steps heavy against the linoleum. He didn't bother with greetings. He shoved the tray closer to me, the pen rolling against my hand. "Sign it, Claire." His voice was sharp, commanding the same tone he used when he cornered me as a child. I looked up at him, feigning hesitation. "I'm not sure I understand." His laugh was bitter. "You don't need to understand. Just do it." His fist slammed against the tray, rattling the water cup, making the pen jump. Linda reached for his arm. "Jason not here?" But her attempt to rein him in only revealed the desperation between them. I let a long pause stretch, letting the tension mount. Then I whispered, my voice shaking just enough. "And if I don't?" Jason's eyes narrowed.
"Then you won't make it back to Fort Bragg."
His words dripped with menace, echoing too clearly. Linda hissed his name, but the damage was done. My phone captured it all, every syllable, every threat. I swallowed hard, forcing tears into my eyes. "Please, I just need more time." Jason smirked, satisfied.
"Not too much time, soldier."
They left not long after, Linda throwing one last look over her shoulder, equal parts frustration and suspicion. The room grew quiet again, but the silence now felt electric. I reached for my phone, stopping the recording, and replayed the last few minutes. Their voices filled the air, undeniable and damning. Linda's insistence, Jason's threat, the unmistakable intent to strip me of everything. I backed up the file, immediately emailing it to Sergeant Davis with only 3 words in the subject line. They threatened me. I attached the audio and hit send. My hands trembled, but this time not from fear. This was control. This was strategy. Lying back against the pillows, I felt a surge of clarity. For years, they had twisted my silence into submission. Now, I was twisting theirs into evidence. Every cruel word, every threat, every manipulation would become a brick in the case against them. As the monitors beeped steadily and the evening sun cast long shadows across the floor, I whispered into the quiet room. "You think I'm weak, but you've just given me exactly what I need." The day I was discharged from the hospital, the sun felt sharper against my skin than it ever had before. Fayetteville's streets buzzed with ordinary life cars honking children on bikes, the smell of fried food drifting from a diner nearby. But for me, nothing was ordinary. Every breath I took was proof that I had survived what was meant to end me. Every step away from that hospital was a step into dangerous territory. Linda and Jason still believed I was weak. Richard still thought I was too naive to understand. But I had their voices, their threats, their lies preserved on the USB and on my phone, and I had no intention of wasting it. Sergeant Davis met me in the parking lot, his uniform crisp, his posture solid. He gave me a long look, his eyes scanning the fading bruises on my face.
"You should still be in bed, Anderson."
I shook my head. "Rest won't save me. Evidence will." He didn't argue. Instead, he opened the passenger door of his Jeep and helped me inside. Back at Fort Bragg in a quiet office, borrowed from a sympathetic military police officer, I laid everything out. The USB drive, the dash cam, the recording from my hospital bed. My hands trembled as I slid each piece across the desk, but my voice was steady.
"This is all of it."
Davis plugged the USB into his laptop, the screen filling with the damning clips. Jason's laughter in the driveway. Linda's voice whispering about policies. Richard's low mutter about my signature. Then the hospital recording Jason's threat, Linda's manipulation. The officer sitting with us, Lieutenant Perez, leaned forward, his brow furrowing deeper with each passing second. When the final clip ended, the room fell silent. Perez finally spoke. "This isn't just assault. This is conspiracy, fraud, extortion." He glanced at me. "They've tried to bury you, Specialist Anderson, but what you have here, this could bury them." For the first time, I allowed myself a small breath of relief. Still doubt gnawed at me. Their family. People won't want to believe it. Perez's voice was firm. "Courts don't care about blood. They care about proof. And you have it." The next step was to strengthen the case. Davis and I drove to the neighborhood where Mrs. Johnson lived, just a few houses away from Richard's. She was on her porch watering her plants, her white hair pinned up neatly. When she saw me, her eyes widened with both worry and recognition. "Claire, dear, you look so pale." I told her softly, "I need your help." She listened as I explained, her lips tightening as I recounted Jason's attack. I didn't need to convince her. She had seen more than I realized. That night, she said firmly, I heard the shouting. "I saw him hit you." I wanted to call the police, but Linda stood on the porch smoking like nothing was wrong. Her hands trembled as she set down her watering can. "I'll testify. I won't let them do this to you again." Her words steadied something inside me. This was no longer just my fight. It was a fight for truth, one voice at a time. Back at Fort Bragg, Perez began assembling the formal complaint under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, while Davis helped me draft a timeline. Every incident, every word, every bruise, it felt like ripping open old wounds, but each line written was another nail in the coffin of their lies. We organized the evidence into folders: physical assault insurance fraud, forged documents, recorded threats. My family's crimes reduced to neat labels. It was surreal. Late into the night, after Perez left, Davis leaned back in his chair and studied me. "You realize this won't just expose them. It'll expose your father's silence, too." I met his gaze, the ache in my chest sharper than any physical wound. He chose his side long ago. Now I'm choosing mine. As I walked back to my barracks room, the lights of Fort Bragg glowing against the dark Carolina sky, I felt the weight of both fear and resolve pressing down. They thought they could silence me forever, but I had begun to build something stronger than silence. I was building a counterattack brick by brick with evidence they could never erase. The next morning, sunlight poured through the blinds of the small MP office at Fort Bragg, striping the desk where the evidence sat in neat piles. I had barely slept, my mind replaying every clip, every whisper, every threat. The bruises on my face had begun to fade to yellow, but inside, the fire burned hotter than ever. It was time to take the fight outside of Fayetteville, beyond the reach of Linda's lies and Jason's fists. It was time to involve the people who could not be bought or silenced. Lieutenant Perez arranged the transfer. The FBI Charlotte Division had jurisdiction over insurance fraud, especially when federal funds and forged signatures were involved. The dashcam footage, the USB drive, and the audio recording from the hospital were each duplicated, one set sealed into an evidence bag, the other secured for backup. Watching them catalog the items felt like watching years of torment transform into something tangible: proof. For the first time, my family's cruelty was no longer just my burden. It was evidence under federal scrutiny. Sergeant Davis drove me to the post office near the base, the heavy envelope containing copies of the files resting in my lap. The address was already typed: Federal Bureau of Investigation, Charlotte Field Office. My hands didn't tremble when I slid the envelope across the counter. The clerk stamped it with practiced efficiency, unaware that inside that paper sleeve lay the truth about years of manipulation and fraud. As the envelope disappeared into the outgoing bin, I exhaled slowly. It was out of my hands now, and that was terrifying but liberating. Back in the Jeep, Davis glanced at me. "You did it. Most people never get this far." I nodded, gripping the dashboard. "Most people don't get pushed this far." He didn't argue. Instead, he handed me a small notebook. "Write down everything else you remember. Dates, times, even little things. The feds will want detail." That night back in my barracks room, I wrote until my fingers cramped. The night Jason ripped my ROTC sash. The time Linda laughed while he shoved me into the railing. The forged papers, the threats, the whispered conversations that now made sense in hindsight. Each memory spilled onto the page, no longer haunting shadows, but part of a case file. Every insult and bruise had a place. Every betrayal had weight. 3 days later, an agent from the FBI arrived at Fort Bragg. Special Agent Turner, tall, gray at the temples, with a voice that carried authority. He shook my hand firmly, his eyes steady. "Specialist Anderson, thank you for your courage." He spoke with the calm precision of someone used to seeing the worst of human behavior. He laid out the process: investigation subpoenas for financial records, coordination with military police, and eventually a public hearing. The words felt both distant and immediate. This was real. My family was about to face something they could not control. After he left, I stood outside the barracks, the Carolina air thick with humidity soldiers running drills in the distance. My heart pounded not from fear, but from anticipation. The counterattack was no longer an idea. It was in motion. Linda's manipulations, Jason's violence, Richard's complicity, they were all about to collide with something stronger than their lies. In the evenings, I rehearsed in my mind what it would mean to face them publicly. The thought of sitting across from Jason while the dashcam footage played on a screen made my stomach twist, but it also steeled me. For years, he had fed off my silence. Soon, the world would hear his voice threatening me in a hospital room. For years, Linda had smiled while pulling strings in the shadows. Soon, her whispers about forged policies would echo in a courtroom. For years, Richard had hidden behind beer cans and muttered excuses. Soon, his name would be printed in federal reports. When I closed my notebook that night, I whispered into the stillness of the barracks, "This isn't just my fight anymore. It's theirs. And when the truth comes out, they'll finally learn what it feels like to be powerless." The day of the hearing arrived with a heaviness that pressed against my chest harder than any weight I had carried in training. The Army had prepared me for ruck marches, for weapons drills, for the sting of sweat in my eyes as I crawled through the red Carolina mud. But nothing in my training had prepared me for walking into a room where my own family would sit across from me, their faces twisted by lies, their eyes full of the same contempt I had known since childhood. The hearing was held on base at Fort Bragg under the framework of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, but with federal observers present. The FBI had coordinated with the military police, ensuring that the scope of the case covered both the assault and the broader fraud. The courtroom was austere, its walls bare except for the flag and the seal of the Army. Rows of soldiers filled the benches, some there out of duty, others out of curiosity. They whispered as I entered, their eyes catching the faint scars along my jaw, the stiffness of my stride. I sat at the long wooden table beside Lieutenant Perez and Special Agent Turner. The hum of the fluorescent lights above seemed louder than usual, buzzing in my ears as I steadied my hands against the surface. Across from me, Linda adjusted her blazer, her hair styled as if this were a job interview rather than a reckoning. Jason slouched in his chair, his smirk poorly hiding the twitch in his jaw. "Richard!" My father looked smaller than I remembered, his veteran's cap clutched in his hands, his gaze darting everywhere but toward me. Colonel Harris presided, his uniform immaculate, his expression carved from stone. He read the charges with crisp authority. Assault, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, forgery, coercion. Each word landed like a drumbeat in the quiet room. Jason shifted uncomfortably. Linda's smile flickered. Richard closed his eyes. My pulse raced, but I kept my head high. The first to testify was Mrs. Johnson. She walked slowly, leaning on her cane, but her voice carried strength as she described what she had seen that night in the driveway. Her words painted the image plainly. Jason's fists, my body collapsing. Linda standing on the porch with a cigarette. Richard doing nothing. I closed my eyes as she spoke each word, both painful and vindicating. When she finished, Jason muttered under his breath, but the microphone caught it. "Liar!" Colonel Harris's voice cut him down sharply. "You will remain silent until addressed." The gavel cracked against wood, the sound echoing through the hall. Next came the evidence. Lieutenant Perez connected the laptop to the projector, and the dashcam footage flickered onto the screen. The grainy image of the driveway filled the room, the sound of cicadas faint in the background, then Jason's form moving into frame. The soldiers in the gallery shifted, some leaning forward. The blow landed my body, crumpled the camera, catching Linda's silhouette on the porch. Gasps rippled through the room. My throat tightened as I relived it, but I forced myself to watch, to witness. The earlier clips followed. Jason and Linda whispering about policies, the words she won't suspect chilling in their casual cruelty. Then Richard's voice, low but unmistakable. Claire will never see it coming. I felt something inside me break and rebuild at the same time. For years, I had carried doubt, wondering if my father was simply weak. Now the world could see his choice for what it was: complicity. The final clip played the audio from the hospital. Linda's soft manipulation, Jason's blunt threat. "If you talk, you won't make it back to Fort Bragg." The silence in the room was suffocating. Even the hum of the lights seemed to vanish. My hands clenched into fists on the table nails, biting into my palms, but I kept my eyes fixed forward. I wanted them to see me unflinching. Colonel Harris broke the silence.
This is not a matter of family dispute. This is criminal behavior undermining not only Specialist Anderson's safety, but the integrity of the Army and the law.
His words carried the weight of judgment yet to come. My heart pounded. The battle was no longer hidden in driveways or hospital rooms. It was here laid bare under the flag, with truth as my weapon. The footage ended, and the silence that followed was louder than any scream. I could feel every pair of eyes in the room shifting, measuring the faces of the people who had spent years convincing me my voice did not matter. Jason was the first to break. He shoved back his chair, his voice rising.
This is manipulated. She set me up. You think a dashcam proves anything?
His words cracked the confidence in his tone, faltering. His lawyer, a thin man in a navy suit, placed a hand on his arm, urging him to sit. Jason ignored him, jabbing a finger in my direction. She's lying. She's always been a liar. She wanted attention, and now she's dragging all of us down. Linda's hand shot out, grabbing Jason's sleeve, her voice low but sharp enough to carry.
Jason, stop. You're making it worse.
But even as she tried to contain him, her own mask slipped. Her eyes flicked toward the jury of officers and FBI observers, calculating, desperate. Her lawyer rose, smoothing his tie. Colonel, with all due respect, these clips lack context. They are fragments cut and spliced. We have no proof these conversations weren't altered. The dashcam could have been tampered with. The audio could have been staged. His voice was measured, but the tremor at the edge betrayed him. Special Agent Turner leaned forward, his voice calm and direct. The metadata confirms the files are unaltered. The timestamps align with hospital logs and neighborhood surveillance. Nothing here is fabricated. He tapped the folder in front of him. We also have corroborating bank records showing fraudulent withdrawals and a policy application bearing a forged signature from Specialist Anderson. The lawyer's composure cracked his eyes, darting to Linda. She leaned forward, her tone cold, her words aimed at the room rather than me. Claire has always misunderstood things. She dramatizes. She wants sympathy. This is her revenge for not getting enough attention as a child. Her words slid like oil across the floor, but they did not land the way she hoped. I saw heads shake in the gallery, soldiers whispering. They had seen the footage. They had heard Jason's threat. Her denial was paper-thin against the weight of evidence. It was then that Colonel Harris turned to me.
Specialist Anderson, do you wish to address the court?
His voice was steady, authoritative, giving me the chance I had waited for my entire life. I rose slowly, my legs stiff but my back straight. The room felt cavernous, every face turned toward me, every light harsh against the bruises still faint along my cheek. For a moment, I was that child again, standing in the kitchen while Linda's voice cut me down. Jason's smirk dared me to resist, and Richard stared at the floor. But then I remembered the cadence of drill instructors the nights running under the Carolina stars, the feeling of steel in my hands on the rifle range. I was not silent anymore. I looked first at Jason. For years you told me I was weak. You wanted me to believe I would never stand on my own. But here I am standing. His jaw tightened, his fists clenched, but he said nothing. Then I turned to Linda. You told me family meant obedience, that love was something I had to earn by silence. But love doesn't demand silence. Love doesn't forge signatures. Her face flushed, her lips pressed tight, but she held my gaze with defiance she no longer owned. Finally, my eyes found Richard, my father, the man who had chosen to watch, to drink, to pretend. My voice wavered not from weakness, but from the weight of truth. You could have stopped all of this. You could have protected me, but you chose not to, and now you will answer for that choice. I turned back to the panel, my voice steady. I have been told my whole life that my words don't matter. Today, they do. I will not be silenced again. The room was so still I could hear the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights above. For the first time in years, I felt taller than Jason, louder than Linda, stronger than Richard. For the first time, the weight of their control had shifted. It was no longer pressing me down. It was pressing them into the light. When I finished speaking, the silence in the room stretched long and taut like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Colonel Harris adjusted his glasses, his voice carrying the weight of finality. The evidence is overwhelming. Assault conspiracy to commit fraud coercion. The actions taken against Specialist Anderson are not matters of family tension. They are crimes. He turned his gaze toward Jason, Linda, and Richard, his words clipped and sharp. And crimes have consequences. Jason exploded from his chair, his face flushed crimson, his fists slamming against the table. This is a setup. She's lying. All of you are in on this. He jabbed a finger toward me, spit flying with his rage. She's nothing. She was supposed to keep quiet. His voice cracked fury, unraveling into desperation. Soldiers in the gallery stiffened, some rising instinctively while 2 military police moved swiftly to restrain him. Jason jerked against their hold, his voice raw. You think this is over, Claire. You think you've won Linda Rose too, her composure shattering. Jason, stop! Her voice trembled, her mask slipping into panic. She looked at the colonel at the FBI agents, her hands outstretched in futile denial. This isn't fair. You don't understand. Her words faltered under the cold gaze of Special Agent Turner, who stood his badge glinting under the harsh lights. Mrs. Linda Anderson and Mr. Jason Whitaker, you are under federal investigation for insurance fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. You will be taken into custody immediately. The sound of cuffs snapping shut filled the air, metallic and final. Jason struggled, but the MP held him firm, dragging him back from the table. His eyes locked on mine, wild and venomous, but beneath the fury, I saw it, the flicker of fear. Linda's face crumpled her pleas, dissolving into whispers as agents guided her toward the door. Richard remained seated, his cap twisted between his hands, his head bowed low. He did not move, did not protest, did not even look at me. When Colonel Harris addressed him, his voice was solemn. As for you, Richard Anderson, while this court cannot rule on your civilian misconduct, the FBI has evidence of your complicity in fraudulent activities. Your silence has consequences even if you never raised a hand. The words landed like stones, heavy and unyielding. The gavel cracked once, final and echoing. The hearing adjourned. The room buzzed with whispers, soldiers murmuring to one another about what they had witnessed. Years of my life had been dragged into daylight, every shadow revealed, every silence broken. And in that moment, I realized something. I was no longer carrying their weight. They were carrying mine. As the MPs escorted Jason and Linda out, I remained standing, shoulders square, chin lifted. The scars on my face still ached. The bruises along my ribs still throbbed, but I felt taller than I had ever felt. I was not just Claire Anderson, the soldier. I was the daughter who had survived the sister who had fought back the woman who had refused to stay silent. Special Agent Turner approached his expression firm but respectful. You did well today, Specialist. Your courage set this in motion. His words were simple, but they rooted deep, stronger than any insult Jason had ever thrown, louder than any silence Richard had ever maintained. I walked out of the courtroom into the sharp Carolina sunlight. The air smelled of pine and dust, and the flag rippled above the base gates. Soldiers passed me, some nodding, some whispering, but all seeing me differently now. Not as a victim, as someone who had faced down her own blood and chosen truth over fear. I paused at the steps, looking back just once. The building loomed tall, but it no longer intimidated me. Behind those walls, the lies had been shattered, the power stripped, the truth spoken. Ahead of me stretched the road back to my barracks, back to the army, back to the life I had chosen. I inhaled deeply, steady and strong, and stepped forward, leaving the weight of their control behind forever. The weeks that followed the hearing passed in a blur of reports, paperwork, and interviews with investigators. For the first time in my life, I was not dreading the knock on the door or the whisper of my name in a hallway. For the first time, the weight pressing down on me was not fear, but responsibility. The responsibility of having told the truth and letting it do its work. The FBI investigation moved swiftly. Jason's fingerprints on forged documents, Linda's emails coordinating with an insurance broker, Richard's bank deposits tied to fraudulent payouts, every piece fit together like a puzzle that no longer required my voice alone to prove. My recordings had been the crack in the dam, and now the flood of evidence had broken it wide open. The trial in federal court came first. I sat quietly in the gallery, my uniform neat, my face composed as the judge read the charges. Jason Whitaker guilty of aggravated assault conspiracy to commit fraud and federal wire fraud, 15 years in a federal correctional facility. Linda Anderson guilty of conspiracy insurance fraud and coercion, 12 years. When the sentences were spoken, Jason erupted one last time, cursing the system, cursing me, even cursing the Army itself. The bailiffs dragged him from the courtroom, his voice echoing until the heavy doors slammed shut. Linda, by contrast, slumped into her chair, her perfect hair falling loose as though her mask had finally slipped for good. Richard sat beside their defense attorney, pale and hollow. The charges against him were lesser conspiracy and misrepresentation, but the stain was permanent. He lost his job at the logistics company, the same one he had clung to for decades. Word spread quickly through Fayetteville. Neighbors who once waved politely now crossed the street to avoid him. Old friends from the VFW post whispered behind his back. In a town like ours, dishonor clung tighter than any chain. I thought seeing them sentenced would feel like triumph. Instead, it felt like release. For years, I had carried the bruises they gave me, the silences they demanded, the shame they wanted me to choke on. Now, they carried the weight. I could finally set it down. Back at Fort Bragg, life moved on with the rhythm of the Army. Training rotations, morning formations, the hum of helicopters overhead. Yet something was different. Soldiers I barely knew stopped to shake my hand. Their eyes filled with respect. They had heard. Not just about the fight in the driveway or the fraud, but about standing in front of the panel and refusing to bow. In the Army, courage was a currency, and for the first time I felt rich in it. One crisp morning, I was called to a formation on the parade field. Rows of soldiers stood at attention as the commanding officer stepped forward. The Army Commendation Medal was pinned to my chest, the ribbon bright against my uniform. The citation read, "Of resilience, of courage, of loyalty to truth." As the words rang out over the loudspeakers, I felt the sting of tears behind my eyes. Not the tears of a child abandoned in a house full of cruelty, but the tears of a soldier who had survived and chosen to stand tall. After the ceremony, Sergeant Davis clapped me on the shoulder, his grin rare but real. "You didn't just fight back Anderson. You showed them what it means to fight smart. That means more than fists ever could." His words sank deep, anchoring me in a way no medal could. That night alone in my barracks room, I looked at the medal on my desk. I thought of Jason behind bars, Linda pacing a prison cell, Richard drinking alone in a quiet house where even the neighbors no longer knocked. Justice had not erased the scars on my body or the years of silence, but it had given me something I never thought I'd have: vindication. I whispered into the stillness, almost as if speaking to the girl I used to be. "You were never weak. They just wanted you to believe it. And now they can never make you believe it again." In the weeks after the sentencing, Fayetteville became a mirror of everything my family had tried to hide. For years, Jason strutted through those streets like a man untouchable. Linda threw her weight around at church luncheons, and Richard clung to his reputation as a hard-working veteran who had done his best. Now the masks had shattered, and the town refused to look away. Neighbors whispered openly at the grocery store. I overheard one man mutter, "That's Richard Anderson, the one whose son's doing 15 years." At the diner near Hay Street, where Linda once held court, with her carefully rehearsed gossip, her name was spoken only in hushed tones, followed by pitying shakes of the head. The Anderson family had spent decades controlling a house through silence and intimidation, but in the open air of Fayetteville, silence turned into condemnation. Richard bore the brunt of it. Without a job, he lingered at home, blinds drawn, the once-tended yard overgrown. When he did step outside the men from his old VFW post, no longer waved. The dishonor clung to him not because of what Jason had done, but because he had chosen silence, had chosen complicity. In a military town like ours, silence in the face of betrayal was unforgivable. I did not celebrate his downfall, but I could not mourn it either. He had written his own sentence long before the court had read it. One afternoon, I walked past the old house on my way back from town. The driveway where Jason had nearly ended me looked smaller than I remembered, the cracked concrete littered with weeds. The porch where Linda once stood smoking as I lay bleeding now sagged its paint peeling. For the first time, I did not feel fear looking at that house. I felt distance. It was no longer mine, no longer a place of power over me. It was just a rotting structure hollowed out by the lies that had kept it standing for too long. Back on base, the Army's rhythm became my healing. The cadence of boots striking the ground during morning runs, the barked commands during drills, the sharp smell of gunpowder on the range, all of it grounded me. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living on my own terms. Soldiers who had once been strangers now greeted me with nods of respect, some with quiet words. "Proud of you, Anderson." It meant more than they knew. At night, I sometimes sat on my bunk staring at the medal pinned neatly to its case. The ribbon was bright, the medal cold, but what it represented was more than an award. It was proof that my voice once smothered now carried weight. Proof that a girl who had grown up with nothing but rejection had forced her truth into the open. The FBI agent Turner checked in once more before leaving Fayetteville. His words were brief but steady. "Your courage brought this case together. Remember that." Then he was gone, swallowed into the machinery of federal work. But his words stayed. I knew the story of Jason and Linda would linger in Fayetteville for years, whispered at barbecues, retold at church gatherings, resurfacing every time someone wanted to warn their children about greed and cruelty. Richard would carry his shame until his last breath. That was no longer my burden. One evening, I walked the perimeter of the base alone. The sky streaked with the last gold of sunset. The pine trees swayed in the breeze, the air thick with the scent of resin and earth. I paused, pressing a hand against the scar along my jaw. It would never vanish, but neither would the strength it reminded me of. I whispered softly, not to Jason, not to Linda, not even to Richard, but to myself. This chapter is over. The next is mine to write. And for the first time in years, I believed it. The night after everything ended, I sat alone in my barracks room at Fort Bragg. The base outside still hummed with life soldiers marching, the faint thrum of helicopters overhead, the cadence of discipline and duty that never truly slept. But within my four walls, silence settled like a heavy blanket. For years, silence had been my prison, a weapon my family used to keep me small. Tonight, it felt different. Tonight, silence was mine. I sat on the edge of my bunk, the Army Commendation Medal on the desk in front of me, its ribbon catching the light from the lamp. I traced its edge with my fingers, not because of the medal itself, but because of what it stood for. This wasn't just recognition from the Army. This was a symbol that the voice they tried to bury had broken through the dirt. I thought of Fayetteville. The streets where I had grown up in shadows now echoed with my name in whispers not of pity but of respect. The neighbors who once turned away when Linda scolded me now turned their backs on her. Richard, once a man who wrapped himself in the word veteran-like armor, now walked dishonored, stripped not by the Army but by the truth. Jason, who believed fists could write my story, now sat behind steel bars. Linda, who believed manipulation was strength, now counted days in a prison cell. And me, I was still here, alive, whole, stronger than ever. To the men and women over 50 who might be listening, I want you to hear me. Many of you know what it is to carry silence for years, maybe decades. You know what it is to sit at family tables and feel invisible. You know the sting of being told your pain doesn't matter, that your truth is inconvenient. You know what it feels like to shrink yourself just to keep the peace. I lived that life for 25 years. I lived it until silence nearly killed me, and I am telling you now, it doesn't have to end that way. The night Jason left me broken in the driveway, I thought my story had ended. I heard the words, "no pulse in that hospital room," and for a moment I believed them. But sometimes life pulls you back, not just to breathe again, but to fight again. That night didn't end my story. It began it. Because the truth was waiting, and the truth always finds the light. I will not lie to you, it wasn't easy. There were moments I wanted to give in to sign the papers Linda pushed in front of me to stay quiet, so Jason would leave me alone to forgive Richard just so I could pretend I still had a father. But easy choices rarely bring justice. Standing up cost me everything I once thought I needed: family, peace, even safety. But it gave me something greater: freedom. And here's what I've learned: control thrives on silence. They kept me silent because they feared what my words could do. The moment I began to speak, their control cracked. And once the truth had air, there was no cage strong enough to contain it. When I walk across the parade field now, I hear my name in a different way. Not whispered in pity, but spoken with respect. And every time I hear it, I know this pain did not destroy me. It forged me. To anyone watching, especially those who carry scars invisible to the world, I ask you, what would you do if your own blood turned against you? Would you stay quiet or would you fight? Drop a comment below. Tell me your story. I read them all because I know how much it matters to be heard. If you've been betrayed, if you've been silenced, if you've been told you don't matter, I'm here to say you do. The truth is patient. It waits even through decades of silence until the day you're ready to let it out. And when you do, the world changes. As I look toward tomorrow, I don't see Jason's fists, or Linda's lies, or Richard's silence. I see a road stretching forward, open, unclaimed, waiting for my steps. I see soldiers around me who call me sister, not because of blood, but because of bond. I see a life I get to write with my own hands. And if you've carried your story in silence, if you've ever sat awake at night wondering if anyone would believe you, this is your sign. Speak, write it, share it, because silence is their weapon, but truth will always be yours. The scar along my jaw will never fade, and that's fine. I want it there. It reminds me of where I came from and who I chose to become. It reminds me that survival is not weakness. It is the foundation of strength. So tonight, as the lights of Fort Bragg flicker outside my window and the American flag snaps in the wind above the base, I sit here with one last message. If your family ever tried to control or break you, remember, truth always finds the light. Have you ever faced betrayal this deep? Share your story in the comments below. I read every word because every voice matters. And if Claire's Fight My Fight has inspired you, subscribe so that more voices like mine are heard. We will not be silent again.